It feels like even after all the ups and downs with Sony's Spider-Man universe, people still have some hopes tucked away for what could come next. And honestly, a lot of those hopes circle back to one thing: how Sony decides to handle Venom 4 and whether or not Null, the god of the symbiotes, will play a bigger role moving forward. Because if you think about it, Venom: The Last Dance already cracked that door open. Even though Venom and Eddie Brock's story looked like it wrapped up, the film dropped just enough hints about Null to leave fans buzzing. And that's where the real potential lies. If Sony leans into that, they could end up telling a story that stands tall. Even usually, fans would say adapting that story on the big screen is impossible without the Avengers, Thor, or other Marvel-owned heroes. But maybe Sony doesn't need all of them. Maybe, if they're smart about it, they can make their own version that still feels massive. That's why Venom 4 feels so crucial, because if the movie really happens, it could act like a bridge between what we've seen so far and something that finally pushes Sony's universe into the big leagues. Tom Hardy's return as Eddie Brock is almost a guarantee, since it's hard to picture Venom without him. But the film could also be the moment when Spider-Man finally steps into the picture. And this isn't just fan dreaming. Sony has been juggling its Spider-Man for years, so it wouldn't be surprising if either Tom Holland or Andrew Garfield showed up. Morbius was a meme more than a hit, and Kraven the Hunter doesn't exactly scream franchise launcher, so Venom remains their strongest card, and doubling down on him somewhere else, especially if he's battling Spider-Man. But if Sony does make Venom 4 and threads Null into it properly, they could finally build toward that King in Black showdown. Now let's talk about Null himself, because he's not just another villain. In the comics, he's this ancient god who existed before the light even came into the universe. His whole deal is hating the light and wanting to drag existence back into darkness. He created the symbiotes, but they ended up betraying him, trapping him on their homeworld, Clintar, which literally means cage. All he needs to be free again is the right codex, and then boom, the entire universe is at risk. That's what makes him so terrifying. When Marvel published the King in Black event, it was this massive crossover with Venom at the center. But the Avengers, the X-Men, and even cosmic heroes like Silver Surfer and Thor played major roles. Earth got swarmed by symbiote dragons, Celestials fell under Null's control, and things looked utterly hopeless. Eddie Brock did eventually take him down, but not before some major sacrifices and some truly wild storylines. The Avengers in their toy box, so the big question is, how do you adapt King in Black without them? This is where I think Sony might actually have an advantage, because they've already opened the door to the Spider-Verse. Remember how Across the Spider-Verse gave us that quick crossover with Venom's Mrs. Chen? That little detail confirmed the Spider-Verse and Venom's world coexist, and once that's out there, the possibilities multiply. Because even though Sony doesn't own Thor or the Fantastic Four, they do own dozens of Spider-Man variants and their Rogues Gallery. They could lean into that instead. Imagine Venom teaming up with Miles Morales, Ghost Spider, and Peter B. Parker to take down Null. It wouldn't be the same as the comic version, but it could be their way of making an all-hands-on-deck event movie. If Sony wanted to, they could eat films directly into the Spider-Verse, which fans are already invested in thanks to the animated films. A bunch of spider heroes versus the god of symbiotes? That sells itself. Sony is already dabbling in live-action crossovers with characters like Spider-Man Noir coming to Amazon Prime, so bringing in more animated heroes into live action doesn't sound far-fetched at all. Would it be divisive not to have the Avengers? Probably, but at the same time it could make the movie more unique. Instead of following the comic beat for beat, Sony would be carving its own path, showing that their Spider-Man universe can take risks without needing Marvel Studios' permission. Of course, there are some comic storylines from King in Black that Sony just can't replicate. Captain America leading the Avengers into battle, for example, is iconic, but impossible since Cap's story ended in the MCU. Same goes for Iron Man riding a symbiote dragon, or characters like Blade recruiting vampires to fight Null. Sony just doesn't have access to them, and even if Marvel did adapt the story in the MCU, some of those beats wouldn't work anymore because certain heroes are gone. Carnage is another example. In the comics, Carnage was crucial to setting up the hive mind stuff Eddie used to fight Null. But in the movies, Carnage is already dead, so that entire subplot doesn't work in Sony's universe. They'd need to invent a new way to handle Eddie connecting to the hive mind. It wouldn't be impossible, but it shows how much would have to change. The same issue pops up with characters like Flash Thompson, who became Agent Anti-Venom in the comics. In Sony's world, he's not even close to that storyline. And if they wanted to, they'd probably have to rewrite Flash's arc from scratch. Same with heroes like the Human Torch or the X-Men. Sony can't touch them, at least not yet. So the big crossover battles would have to be replaced with Spider-Verse characters. But here's the thing. Maybe that's actually better, because it forces Sony to focus on the characters they do have instead of leaning on Marvel's bigger names. A Spider-Verse version of King in Black could feel like Sony's Endgame, bringing together everything they've built in the Venom films and the animated Spider-Verse. It would still have that epic, everyone fighting together energy, just with a different lineup. And honestly, people love Miles Morales, Gwen, and even weirder Spider-Man variants, so it might work even better than expected. Now, Venom himself defeating Null like in the comics might be off the table, since Venom: The Last Dance ended with Eddie and Venom's deaths. But comic book movies always find a way around those problems. Multiverse logic could easily bring another Eddie and Venom into the fight, or Sony might even have Spider-Man be the one to land the final blow this time, which could be their way of tying Venom's story to Spider-Man's future. At the end of the day, Venom 4 could be the movie that sets this all in motion. Even if it doesn't give us the full King in Black, it could tease Null's return and start planting seeds for a Spider-Verse crossover, because Sony knows that without Spider-Man, their universe doesn't have the same spark. And since audiences are already hyped about the animated Spider-Verse, why not build on that momentum? It feels like the smartest play they could make. So even though Venom's story looked like it wrapped up, there are still a bunch of directions Sony can take. They can't adapt King in Black exactly the way Marvel did, but they can twist it to fit their own sandbox. Whether that means Venom fighting Spider-Man, Spider-Verse heroes taking on Null, or some brand new spin, there's plenty of material for Sony to keep their universe alive. And honestly, if they pull it off, Venom 4 could end up being remembered as the turning point that proved Sony's Spider-Man universe can stand on its own 2 feet. And that's that for today's video, folks. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in our next video.